The small Oregon town of Maple Ridge always looked peaceful from the outside. But inside the old houses lived stories that felt far heavier than their quiet streets suggested. Liam knew that weight well, because he carried it every day since he lost both of his parents 5 years earlier. After the accident, the only person who stepped in for him was Caroline, his mother's closest friend, the woman who practically helped raise him even when his parents were alive. She wasn't related to him by blood, but she always called him son out of habit, a nickname from years of caring and protecting, and he never corrected her, because that name made him feel like he still belonged somewhere in the world. Still, as he grew older, that simple nickname began to feel different, heavier, more complicated in ways he didn't fully understand. On that chilly evening, with clouds rolling over the horizon, Liam sat on the back porch staring at the fading sky, trying to quiet the storm inside his head. Caroline stepped outside after noticing him through the window, pulling her sweater close as the cold breeze brushed against her skin. She always had a calm presence, the kind that softened a broken heart just by standing close. She stopped by the wooden railing and looked at him with concern, trying to understand the shadows behind his quiet eyes. "Son, don't worry, no one will see us, the main thing is to be faster," she said with a playful tone as she handed him the plastic cover they used to protect the firewood pile. Her words weren't serious, but she said them to pull him out of his heavy thoughts, and the small smile that formed on his face showed that it worked. Liam stood and helped her pull the cover over the wood, their movements quick as the wind picked up. For a moment, they worked the way they always had, silently in sync, like two people who had lived through too much together to need many words. But when their hands brushed against each other, something unexpected sparked inside both of them. Liam pulled his hand back a little too quickly, pretending he only needed a better grip, but he felt the warmth linger on his skin. Caroline felt it as well, and though she tried to ignore the flutter in her chest, it stayed with her, reminding her of the closeness that had been slowly growing between them over the past year. A closeness that had nothing to do with guardianship or responsibility anymore. She had watched him become a man, someone gentle, steady, and quietly strong, a man who carried grief but didn't let it destroy him. She admired him deeply, more than she wanted to admit aloud. When the thunder rolled across the sky, louder this time, she stepped back slightly, not because she feared the storm, but because she feared the shift she felt between them, a change she wasn't prepared to face. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and forced a smile as she said, "Let's hurry, the rain is coming faster than we thought." Liam nodded, keeping his gaze low as they finished the task, but his mind wasn't on the firewood anymore. It was on her, on the way she looked at him earlier, on the way his heart reacted to her presence. He'd always been grateful to her, always cared for her, always leaned on her when the world felt too heavy, but lately something had changed. His gratitude had turned into something warmer, something more complicated, something he didn't dare name. He didn't want to disrespect her, nor did he want to ruin the bond they already had, but the feelings were there, rising inside him like a tide he couldn't hold back forever. When the first drops of rain hit the porch roof, Caroline stepped toward the door, hesitating for a moment as if she was about to say something important, but instead she said, "Come inside when you're done, it's getting cold." Her voice was soft, almost fragile, carrying something unspoken beneath it. Liam watched her walk back into the house, the warm light inside brushing her silhouette with gold. He felt a pull in his chest, a warmth mixed with confusion, and as the rain fell harder, he stood there for a moment, letting the cool air hit his face, trying to make sense of the growing ache inside him. When he finally re-entered the house, the atmosphere felt different, quieter, heavier with the air of something unsaid. The living room was dimly lit, the soft glow from the old lamp casting shadows across the furniture. Caroline was in the kitchen, her back turned to him as she boiled water for tea. He wanted to walk in and say something, anything, but he didn't know where to start. They had always moved around each other so easily, but tonight, every step felt like crossing a thin line he didn't fully understand. The storm outside grew stronger, lightning briefly illuminating the windows, reminding them how fragile and unpredictable life could be. Caroline turned for just a moment, spotting him in the doorway, but instead of speaking, she simply offered him a gentle smile, one that held warmth, sadness, and a question she wasn't ready to ask. Liam returned the smile, unsure of what to say, unsure of what he felt, and unsure of why the air between them felt different now, like something had shifted too quickly for either of them to name. When she placed 2 cups on the table, her movements were slow, thoughtful, almost careful, as if she was trying not to break something delicate. The rain intensified outside, and the two of them sat quietly, listening to the storm, both searching for words that refused to come. As the night grew darker, the house seemed to breathe around them, holding their secrets gently, waiting for the moment one of them would speak first. But neither did, not yet. Instead, they let the silence stretch, soft and fragile, while both of their hearts whispered the same question. A question neither of them dared to voice. Was this simply comfort between two lonely souls, or was something deeper starting to grow between them, something neither of them were ready for but could no longer ignore? And though neither of them knew it yet, everything that happened that night was only the beginning of a far more complicated journey, one that would test their hearts in ways they never expected, one that would force them to confront feelings they weren't ready to admit, and one that would change both of their lives forever. For now they simply sat together, quietly listening to the rain, both pretending nothing had changed, even though everything had. The rain kept falling through the night, tapping softly on the windows like it was trying to remind the small Oregon house that some storms didn't stay outside. Some storms lived inside the people trying their best to hold themselves together. Caroline stood in the quiet kitchen, watching the kettle let out thin trails of steam, but her mind wasn't on the kettle. Her mind replayed the moment on the porch when her hand brushed against Liam's, a touch so small yet so powerful that it stayed with her long after. She walked back inside. She tried to tell herself it was only the result of grief, the result of two lonely hearts leaning toward each other in a difficult season, but her heartbeat refused to calm down, reminding her that something deeper had formed between them over time, a connection that wasn't simple anymore. Meanwhile, Liam stepped into the kitchen a few moments later, his hair damp from the rain, his clothes sticking slightly to him as if the storm outside had followed him in. He paused. When he saw her, feeling the shift in the air, feeling the closeness he couldn't explain, and for a moment he didn't know whether to step forward or stay still, because every choice felt heavy now. Caroline finally turned toward him, her eyes soft but tired, carrying both warmth and worry. "You're soaked," she said gently, her voice softer than she intended, her breath catching slightly at the sight of him standing there, grown, calm, quiet, and stronger than she remembered. Liam shrugged with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine," he said, but the truth sat behind his words. He wasn't fine, he hadn't been fine for years, but he didn't want to put more weight on her shoulders. He sat down at the small table, watching her move around the kitchen with familiar grace, noticing things about her he never slowed down enough to notice before. The slight trembling of her fingers when she placed the cups down, the worry lines near her eyes, the soft sadness she carried every day without complaining. Caroline handed him a warm mug, and when their fingers touched again, the same spark returned, stronger this time, so strong that for a moment both forgot to breathe. Neither of them pulled away quickly. Their hands lingered for a heartbeat too long, and in that brief moment, the kitchen suddenly felt smaller, warmer, heavier with emotions neither of them could name without changing everything between them. Caroline finally sat across from him, her movements slow and thoughtful as if she was scared of breaking the fragile calm around them. "You've been carrying too much," she whispered, her voice filled with the kind of concern that came from years of loving him, not romantically before, but deeply, protectively, steadily. And yet something new had been growing between them lately, something fear and loneliness had pushed into the light. Liam looked up, his expression raw. "So have you," he said softly, and the truth in his voice hit her harder than she expected. She wasn't used to being seen so clearly, not since his parents passed, not since the town moved on and forgot how much pain she held in silence. His words made her chest tighten, not with sadness but with relief. Someone finally understood her, someone finally noticed her, someone finally cared enough to look deeper. They talked quietly for a while, sharing thoughts they hadn't said aloud in months, talking about the past, the house, the future, and everything in between. The storm grew louder outside, making the windows shake, but somehow the noise only made the kitchen feel more intimate, more protected, like the world outside couldn't reach them there. At some point in their conversation, Caroline reached across the table and placed her hand on top of Liam's, a gesture that was meant to be comforting. Yet something warm and unfamiliar filled the space between them, the same unspoken something they both felt on the porch. "Son, don't worry," she whispered, using the nickname she had called him for years, though now it felt different, heavier, echoing with a mix of past care and present emotion. "No one will see us struggling, we're doing our best, we'll get through this together." Her thumb brushed lightly across his knuckles, a soft, accidental motion that made Liam's breath catch for a moment. His heartbeat quickened, Not out of confusion now but out of awareness of how close they truly were and how deep the connection between them had grown. He didn't pull his hand away, couldn't pull away, not from her, not from the warmth she offered so freely. The kettle clicked softly, breaking the fragile stillness, reminding both of them that they were sitting too close, sharing too much, feeling something neither of them expected to feel. Caroline quickly withdrew her hand, almost knocking over her cup in her hurry, her cheeks turning slightly warm as she stood up too fast and walked toward the counter, pretending to be busy even though the kettle was already off. "It's late," she whispered, her voice trembling just a little. "We should sleep?" Liam watched her, noticing every detail, the way she avoided his gaze, the way she held the counter for a moment longer than needed, the way her shoulders rose and fell with quiet tension. He wanted to say something honest, something real, something like "I felt it too." But the words stuck in his throat because he knew one wrong sentence could break the delicate bond they had. Caroline headed toward the hallway, her steps slow, her heartbeat loud enough in her ears that she wondered if he could hear it too. At the doorway she hesitated for a second, her hand resting lightly against the frame, as if she wanted to look back at him but didn't trust herself to do it without revealing something she wasn't ready to speak. Liam sat at the table long after she left, staring at the space where she had been sitting, replaying every second of their conversation, every quiet breath, every accidental touch, wondering what it meant, wondering if he imagined it, wondering if she felt the same pull he did. The house felt different now, different in a way that made his chest feel both lighter and heavier at the same time, like something new had begun between them, something powerful enough to change the entire direction of their lives, but fragile enough to disappear if they pushed too fast. Outside, thunder rumbled again, shaking the windows, and Liam wondered if the storm was trying to warn him or push him forward. He stayed at the table until the tea turned cold, until the lights flickered slightly from the wind, until his heart finally calmed enough for him to stand. As he walked to his room, he paused at the end of the hallway, hearing the faint sound of Caroline pacing inside her room, her steps soft yet restless, as if she too was fighting something she didn't know how to name. He stood there for a moment, wanting to knock, wanting to talk, wanting to tell her he wasn't afraid of the closeness growing between them, but he didn't. Not tonight. He returned to his room, lying awake as the storm continued outside, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about grief or loneliness. He was thinking about her, thinking about the way she looked at him tonight, thinking about the way her voice shook when she said it was late, thinking about the warmth in her touch, and he knew that when morning came, nothing between them would feel the same again. Whether they wanted it or not, something had shifted, something had awakened, something neither of them could ignore. Forever, the storm outside finally softened, but the storm inside both of them was just beginning, and morning would bring answers they weren't ready for, answers that would pull them closer or push them apart. But either way, everything would change. Morning arrived with bright sunlight that pushed its way through the curtains, turning the quiet house into a place filled with soft gold light, the kind that made it impossible to hide thoughts, feelings, or fears. Caroline stood by the window in the living room, her arms wrapped around herself as she watched the sunlight stretch across the lawn. She had barely slept, her mind replaying every second of the night before, every look, every touch, every tremble in her own voice. She knew something had shifted inside her, something that had been building slowly without her noticing, and now that it was clear, she didn't know how to handle it. Liam walked toward the living room, his steps slow, quiet, almost hesitant. He saw her standing near the window and paused for a moment, taking in the sight of her bathed in morning light. She looked peaceful yet weighed down, strong yet delicate, as if one more emotional moment might push her past the point of staying calm. He wanted to speak, but he wasn't sure what words were safe anymore. When she finally turned, their eyes met, and the room seemed to freeze for a brief second, carrying the memory of last night between them like a soft echo. "Morning," Liam said gently, trying to lighten the tension, but his voice carried something deeper, something warm and careful. Caroline offered a tiny smile, but her eyes held a flicker of fear, not fear of him, but fear of what her heart was telling her, something she didn't expect, something she didn't know how to manage. "Morning," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned back to the window, needing a moment to steady herself before facing him fully. Liam stepped closer, not too close, just enough to show he wasn't running from the conversation they both knew they needed to have. "About last night," he began, but before he could continue, she gently lifted her hand, stopping him instantly. "Please," she said quietly, "let me talk first." He nodded, waiting. Her fingers trembled slightly as she took a slow breath. We were hurting, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Sometimes pain makes people reach for each other even if they don't mean to. Liam felt a sharp tug in his chest. The words were sensible, practical, and completely opposite of what he felt. He didn't want to believe last night was just pain, just grief, or just two lonely people trying to survive a storm. He felt more than that, something warmer, something real, something he didn't want to dismiss so easily. Maybe, he said softly. But it didn't feel like just that. Caroline closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the emotion pushing its way up her throat. She had known him for so long, watched him grow, supported him through pain that would have broken many others. But somewhere along the line, without warning, he had become someone she admired, respected, someone whose presence warmed her in a way that made her feel alive again. Something she thought she would never feel after losing so many people, but she couldn't say that out loud, not when every step forward felt like stepping onto thin ice. We have to be careful, she whispered. Feelings can get mixed when life gets heavy. Liam stepped a little closer, his eyes searching hers. I know what I felt, he said, not forceful, just honest. I'm not confused. Caroline swallowed hard, her eyes glistening in the sunlight, not with tears of sadness, but with the overwhelming weight of truth she wasn't ready to speak. Liam, she breathed. You're young, your life is just beginning, and I'm still picking up pieces from my own past. He shook his head gently. You're not broken, he said. You're stronger than anyone I know. The sincerity in his voice made her heart ache in a way she wasn't prepared for. She turned her face slightly, unable to hold his gaze because the truth in his eyes threatened every wall she was trying to keep up. We need time, she whispered again. Time to understand what's real and what's just the echo of everything we've been through. Liam didn't argue, didn't push, but the look on his face made it clear that the feeling wasn't going away. Not for him, and she could sense it, feel it, as strongly as she felt her own heartbeat. They stood in silence for a moment, the morning sunlight wrapping around them like a soft reminder that life kept moving whether they were ready or not. Caroline finally touched his arm, a gentle, warm touch that sent a quiet shock through both of them. We'll figure it out, she said softly. We just need space to breathe. Her touch lingered for a second longer than she intended, and when she pulled her hand back, the absence felt loud between them. Liam stepped beside her at the window, not too close, just close enough to let her know he wasn't leaving, wasn't running, wasn't afraid of the emotion between them. They stood together watching the light spread across Maple Ridge, both pretending the silence was calm when inside it felt like a quiet storm waiting to rise again. Caroline breathed in slowly, feeling her chest tighten with both relief and longing. She wasn't saying no, she wasn't saying yes, she was asking for time, for pace, for caution, because she cared too deeply to risk hurting him or herself by moving too quickly. And he understood that, even though his heart wanted to step closer to her. The day moved forward quietly, the house filling with small sounds, running water, doors opening, the distant hum of cars passing by on the main road. But no sound was loud enough to drown out the emotion sitting gently but powerfully between them. Later, as the morning turned to noon, they walked through the house doing simple tasks, avoiding heavy conversations but unable to avoid the soft glances that kept meeting in the air, each glance carrying a quiet truth neither of them could deny. The connection between them wasn't gone, it hadn't faded, it had simply settled deeper, quieter, waiting. When Caroline walked past him in the hallway, their shoulders brushed lightly, a touch so small yet so full of meaning that both paused for a second, feeling the moment stretch before they forced themselves to keep moving. By afternoon, they both found themselves in the living room again. This time sitting on opposite ends of the couch, not far, not close, a quiet balance that felt strangely comforting. Caroline finally spoke, her voice softer than before. We'll be okay, she said, almost as if she needed to hear it herself. We just have to move slowly. Liam nodded, understanding even though his heart wished it were simpler. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She looked at him, then really looked, and the softness in her eyes told him she believed him, and she wanted him. There, the truth between them was no longer a sudden spark. It was a steady warmth, a quiet promise, something growing, something real, something that would unfold in its own time. The world outside continued moving, the sun rising high, the storm long gone, but inside the small house, a new chapter had begun gently, quietly, with caution and emotion woven together in a way neither of them expected. And though they didn't know where it would lead, they both knew one thing: nothing between them would ever be the same again, and neither of them wanted it to be, not anymore.